Hey, Miguel Dorati and Chadillac back here on the CRP, and we're going to tackle one of those subjects that doesn't get a lot of attention here on the CRP. I'm trying to get it more attention, and Chad's going to ask why. So we're going to talk pro wrestling history and current, and see where we go from there. Chadillac, I know you got some pro wrestling knowledge, and you've watched it and stuff like that, but you got some questions too, don't you?
Okay, well, look, first of all, my first experience with pro wrestling was Dick the Bruiser, because Dick the Bruiser is literally from my hometown. He's from Delphi, Indiana, pronounced Delphi anyplace else except in Delphi, where it's pronounced Delphi, Indiana. His house still stands there. I don't think any of his family lives there anymore. I think the house sits empty, as far as I know, but it's a pretty nice little old country home. And Dick the Bruiser is from Delphi, Indiana. So he competed, he wrestled because that my father and my grandpa and everyone always called it wrestling. So there was a difference between I wrestled in high school. They were wrestlers. Yeah. So, but for the life of me, I would sit on my grandpa Frank's lap and I would watch boxing. And, that's where I was exposed to Ali, Boom Boom Mancini, Wilfred Benitez, Sugar Ray Leonard, the cornucopia of all the greats, Joe Frazier, and so I understood boxing and I loved it instantly. I was drawn to it. My grandpa liked it, and so I wanted to impress him. So I wanted to like it. It was easy. But then he would watch wrestling on Sunday mornings. And he would, he'd say, come on, buddy, sit on Grandpa's lap and let's watch some wrestling. And I'd say, oh, okay. And initially, like the first 2 minutes of it, I was actually appalled because the brutality of it seemed so awful because and they're screaming, the guy's got a guy's hand and he's breaking his arm, and I mean, it looked horrific to me. I was scared. And then all of a sudden I went, they're punching and they're stomping their foot as they punch. They're slapping them and they're stomping their foot. And I go, why are they stomping their foot? And my grandpa said, well, they're not really hitting each other. And I said, oh. And instantly I lost all interest in it. I've been peripherally involved in professional wrestling in one way or another my entire life because it's always been around in some way, because it kind of ties into what we've always done, which is MMA, which is how we got into combat sports, really. And I learned a lot about promoting MMA through who I think is the best promoter in the world, Vince McMahon. And so I would watch what Vince McMahon did, and I would try to copy certain things he did to the best of my ability in my little show. Other than that, I don't get it. I don't understand why grown men watch it, or women. I don't even understand why kids like it. Please, Miguel, for the love of God, explain to me. You're an intellectual. You're a brilliant man. You're, in my opinion, probably the best matchmaker on the planet, and you know a great deal about so many different institutions. You're extremely well read. There's not a book that I can name that I've read that you haven't, probably, other than maybe Foster Wallace, and you've read 30 times more than I'll ever dream of reading. And you watch pro wrestling, and you love it, right? I mean, you love it.
Absolutely. I'll tell you a story, and I'll tell you the theme
of this
podcast.
That.
So, all right. First, I think this may very well be the appeal to to a lot of people. But you in the build up to this, I made you watch Dusty Rhodes' Hard Times promo, and pro wrestling heads will know about that. But you picture our friend Jeff Osborne, 8 or 10 years old, seeing that. He's hooked. I was hooked. You're hooked. You know what I mean?
Can
Especially,
Can I comment on that real quickly?
Go ahead.
Before you get started, let me just say that so you sent me to watch, it's the Dusty Rhodes. What was it called again?
Hard Times.
Hard Times.
It's
if you look it up on YouTube, that's the promo. And all it is
fan will know it.
Is this fat guy in a suit that doesn't fit right with a tie that's obviously his shirt's too small, so his tie won't even go on because it stretches, neck is so big. He's got this big fro curly hair and he's wearing glasses and he looks totally ridiculous in every way. And he even looks like he's got like bruises on his head or something where the lighting is wrong. And he's got a guy interviewing him that's partially bald. And you can barely see the guy. But when this guy goes off and starts talking about the working man, and I immediately said, Jesus Christ, that sounds like Donald Trump. That's how he won the election. If anyone wants to win the election, all they've got to do is watch Dusty Rhodes' Hard Times and go out and give that speech and put their name in his place, and they could win because they can win anybody over because it's really amazing. Well, so I understand that to some degree.
Okay,
take me from there.
Here's the bottom line: is with Dusty, you talk about an all-time great, but this is the wrinkle that pro wrestling adds is that you do get to know the characters a little bit better than you do in your average guy. I mean, even with the UFC, you get your promos, you get your half-hour show before big fights and stuff like that. In the modern era, this has changed a lot, but you really, you're reading newspapers, you're reading magazines in the 70s and 80s and stuff like that. And even before that, this is augmented even more. When you get to meet or see a guy every week on the TV shows, it makes an impact. So Dusty, he was a character throughout. My greatest memory of what I remember a truly great pro wrestling story, it was a Dusty Rhodes story that I'll tell here, just to capture it. So going back though, if you go back to the 1900s, which is early 1900s, is my bread and butter in the boxing world, there is huge and ample interaction between pro wrestlers of the day and wrestlers of the day. It wasn't even pro wrestling in the same way, and boxing. Go back to the 1870s, and bars in New York's Four Corners and stuff might have like Wednesday night wrestling, where they would allow like the locks and things that boxers don't like, and then Thursday night they'd have boxing.
Was the wrestling real?
It's hard for me to say. I can tell you this.
I mean, there's farmers wrestling.
Yeah, no, I can tell you this.
That's real.
That some of it definitely was real. And when there was conversation over who the toughest guy in the world was, it was the boxing heavyweight champion and the wrestling heavyweight champion. Names from the turn of the century like Hackenschmidt and Gotch are all-time names that are still remembered in the wrestling communities today as guys that were, untouchable guys. In the example of Carl Gotch, I think Gotch actually has one boxing match listed in BoxRec. And there's rumors and stories of him actually doing several other boxing matches to test himself, but having to use a different name because even boxers weren't going to friggin' mess with Carl Gotch. You know what I mean? Even if he was going to box, because Gotch was that kind of crossover name, a guy who is a legend still. Then I think you had a whole series of fighters like Willie Meehan, and I lost Chad. Huh? Where'd you go? Hey, you back?
I have no idea what just happened there. My internet went completely dead. I'm sorry about that, folks.
Okay, it's short. We'll get it edited out.
Can you start over from where you started talking about?
I know exactly where I'm going to pick up.
Okay, because you dropped off at they were in the bar, and I said, farmers wrestling is real, and then nothing.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, I got then you have a whole series of fighters like Willie Meehan and like Farmer Burns. You bring up Farmer, you bring up farmers wrestling, but Willie Meehan and Farmer Burns from the turn of the century were pro boxers. Willie Meehan had 100 fights. Willie Meehan fought Jack Dempsey 6 times and beat him once. But Willie Meehan was also known as Fat Boy. He fought from bantamweight all the way to heavyweight and was known as a clown to a certain extent. He was the kind of guy, and I've seen interviews with him from the 20s when he was already retired. They were actually asking about a Dempsey fight because he had fought both Dempsey and his opponent. And he had some very interesting things to say that are very telling. First, he says, when I fought Dempsey, those were real, because, they may have been 4 and 6 round fights, but, when you're fighting, for $50 in a cold town and, where in these places that they fought, those were real fights. He said Dempsey hit him with a liver shot that he felt for 2 years. So, that gives you an idea. The opponent, he said, no, I fought him in Cleveland and I got paid X amount. I gave him 5 good rounds. The ref seemed to want to call it quits, and I took a knee and stuff. We gave him a show. So I think at that point, you're talking about a little bit of what is a pro wrestler's aspect where there were guys who would jump in there and do the work and stuff like that. And, you can't say the boxers were going all out against guys or in situations like that. Again, I think the money was a consideration. So he kind of hinted that he put in enough work that he didn't get into it like he did with Dempsey there. I'm not saying he faked the fight or anything like that, but when the ref went to call it quits after 4 or 5 rounds, he compared it to about the amount of money was made. He felt the show was equitable for the crowd, and he moved on to fight the next week. You know what I mean? So, but there were a lot of guys like that. Farmer Burns, there are many stories of him attending Jack Johnson's training camps. And not only Jack Johnson's training camps, the training camps of his opponent in the, Jack Johnson Jeffries, all-time, white versus black heavyweight fight that went down. Those guys bought in the pro wrestlers for the mauling and the clinching. That's what they practice with them.
Yeah.
So it becomes interesting. After that, it adapts itself and changes, and wrestling has become much more P.T. Barnum and much more of a show.
Right.
What we see today, and even so in the 50s and stuff, you're seeing, I think you're seeing there mainly fake fights. In the 1900s, I don't know if that was always the case there. So,
you had Ali and the guy with the curly hair. What was that one? Not to veer too far off subject, but Ali fought a wrestler, right?
Well, he fought Antonio Inoki. That's the really famous one.
I thought Ali fought the curly-haired, gorgeous
George.
Yeah. Wasn't there something about that?
Now, Ali actually has said that Gorgeous George was an influence on him for like interviews. And
that's what it was.
Presentation and stuff.
Okay.
But I don't think they actually had a confrontation.
This guy had this hair, and he came out in this flowing robe, and you couldn't look more effeminate than him. And there's something really there's like a strange tie between the cross-dressers and the transvestites, drag queens, and wrestling, right? There's a tie to that, right?
Well, look.
Is that accidental?
I'm a fan. No, but I think the character recycles itself. What you're talking about, Gorgeous George, to Adrian Street, to even Adrian Adonis even spent some time as a LGBTQ member, back in the day kind of thing. And he was, Jesse Ventura's tag team partner in the leather jacket wearing East-West Connection guy. You know what I mean? So
not really, but yeah. I mean, I don't really know.
But who Jesse Ventura is, right?
He was the governor. He was the governor of Minnesota for a while.
at his high point, he was tag team partners with Adrian Adonis. Adrian Adonis was a heavy-set dude, but they were badasses when they were together. Leather jackets, sunglasses, bikers, one from the East Coast, one from the West Coast. That was their whole get up in their whole
That's
story.
the East-West connection.
So, and he went from being a badass to being I believe it was gay, the character. He actually passed away in a car accident, I believe, Adrian Adonis. But I don't have all the info there. But yeah, the character recycled itself.
But take me. Okay, so what happened in your life what was your moment where, you were saying if Osborne saw this at 8 years old, can you imagine, when my kid,
as a friend of ours, when my
kid gave the guy with the long hair 5 at the show we saw, they set us on the turnbuckle, and thank you, Mr. Ball from Indianapolis Fieldhouse for that. They gave, when Soda Pop gave, what's his name? The champion.
Roman Reigns?
Roman Reigns, yeah. He gave him 5. And my son will never forget that. It was amazing to him. What's your moment? What happened to you to make why do you like this? I don't get it.
I used to watch it with my dad when I was a kid. And I'll tell you, this was the cool part. And being Latino and from New York, a couple of things get juxtaposed, right? So now I'm in New York. So anything WWE, I'm on top of, from the championship reigns of Bruno Sammartino on. I pretty much watched it from, the superstar Billy Graham, Pedro Morales, Bob Backlund, that whole rise, Backlund's long reign, Backlund's loss to the Iron Sheik, Hulk Hogan. I watched that all under my dad's arm. So, that's a cool memory.
So your dad liked it too.
My dad was a psychologist, and he considered it something that was like a soap opera that he could just watch and be entertained and move on with. And he really was trying to forget about listening to other people's problems. At least that's the way it was portrayed to a kid, because my father would not fit the bill of a pro wrestling fan, because he was a doctor and an educated guy, and you'd think he would ask the questions that you asked, but he allowed himself to be entertained. I think that's part of it, The other cool part is, though, that in New York, even in the 70s and 80s, there were a couple of the UHF, I think they're called, the TV channels, which are like 41 and 42.
Oh, yeah.
And those are Spanish channels. They came out of Florida. And because of that, we caught a ton of Florida wrestling. And I used to literally watch, Florida wrestling sometimes, from under the covers, trying, faking I'm asleep kind of thing, just to catch it, because it might be on at 11 or 11:30 at night or whatever. And, Florida and that wrestling was a whole different ballgame. First of all, they'd show much more raw stuff on television than the WWE ever did. You're talking about the WWE era of Johnny Rods, Steve King, and the Jobbers.
Did they have blood?
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, that's what.
Because I don't remember. I don't remember watching the WWE in the in the late 80s, or early to mid to late 80s. WWE got really, really popular, and my brother would watch it on Sunday mornings. And I'd wake up hungover because I was in high school then, and it would be on, and so I was superfluously connected to it, and I never saw blood. Never.
There came a point, right around the mid '80s, when AIDS became an international, like a real forefront problem.
Oh yeah.
The blood was frowned upon. But it's funny, you mentioned when you were talking about the Hard Times interview, you said that looked like, that's literally scar tissue on Dusty Rhodes' forehead.
Really?
Scar tissue. Yeah, from cutting himself. And he, you can look it up. Look up Dusty Rhodes' scar tissue. Look at the pictures.
Okay, so Mickey Rourke's
his body. He altered his body. Look at his head.
Mickey Rourke's The Wrestler, that movie, it's a really good movie.
Yeah.
That's really true then? I mean, that's how it really is?
Oh, yeah.
They would really be taking staples out.
The trick is you put a little bit of tape on your fingers with a little sliver of a razor blade, just a sliver, right? So somewhere in the course of it, like for example, I forget who the wrestlers are, but there's a very vivid example of it where a guy does the trick of grabbing the second rope and tying his head up between the top rope and the second rope. So he's literally sitting there with his head like this. He's holding the rope, and the guy comes over and hits him with a chair shot. And you can see the guy go like this after the chair shot. And then the blood comes out from a stream like this. Chair doesn't do that. That's how they cut themselves in general, or in the old days they did. Dusty Rhodes is a prime example of that. But a lot of the old-time wrestlers, you'll see scar tissue on their heads. So it's a very serious life.
Yeah, that's
hardcore. I mean, there's nothing else that can describe it but hardcore. That you run a razor blade and you're willing to do it day after day for the crowd, And that was Dusty. And many other guys from the Blood era, what I mean?
And the falls and all of that stuff and CTE, that all the brain injury comes into question. So I mean, these guys are beating the hell out of themselves, no matter how you look at
it. The trauma of, like, for example, the falls, just a fall from the ring to the apron, to the floor, to fall flat on your back, and see how that rattles your body every day. You know what I mean? It's like, the abuse they take is far beyond any of the abuse the other people take, because it's not competition. They're forced to do 4 or 5, days a week kind of thing, especially, old days and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm sure that there are a lot of stories that are like, oh man, and then tough guys. Yeah, these guys, they personify tough and they enjoy, they're in the conversation. The thing is especially now, to me, to be a UFC fighter, to be a boxer, to be a pro wrestler, at some point you got to go dedicate your life to it. Which means that once you've done that, you can't do the other. Not at that level. Lesnar is to a certain extent a freak, as everybody already knows, but he's also dabbling in both to a certain extent. He's never fully committed to either.
And we kind of think that's over, right? I mean,
that's what?
That's kind of over. He's pretty much not in the UFC anymore. He's staying strictly with the WWE now.
Yeah, I mean, he's over 40, and I think he's in on a business end. He realized it, and at the end of the day, right now, it looks like the WWE is still taking care of him.
Okay, but look, we've gotten off topic as usual. I want to know. Here's what I want to know. Tell me what happened that one day. I mean, I know you're with your dad, and there's the nostalgia, and not to get too personal, but I know you lost your dad pretty early, and I don't want to get too deep into your family stuff.
But the stories were compelling. I'll tell you a story.
But tell me what happened that you all of a sudden, because you watch wrestling now.
No,
you'll say something. Oh, I was watching last night's wrestling, and so got mad at so and they threw a brick, and I'm like, are you kidding me, man?
No.
Why are you even talking to me about this? It's so beneath you. I can't believe it. But it's not. It's not beneath you.
It's funny. My favorite comedian. I know that you respect Doug Stanhope. Doug Stanhope.
Oh yes.
In his act, says it in an appalled fashion. He goes, "We live in a country where pro wrestling is the #1 TV show, in the world. So, live with it. People like it, and I don't have to explain it, But here's the part of it. Aside from the nostalgia, you can see now that you know a little bit about it, and you've got the history and stuff. For me, a lot of the thing now that I notice is the second generation fighters, like you mentioned, Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns comes from a family. I think he's third generation, right? So now
of wrestlers.
So like remember the Samoans? That's his family. The Samoans, The Rock, they're all interrelated.
The Rock and the Reigns, the Rock and Roman Reigns
are a family. Yes,
are brothers or something?
No, not brothers, cousins or something.
Cousins or something?
They're from the same wrestling family.
Wow. Okay, so it's a
So
generational
things like that.
thing.
And Dusty Rhodes is another.
But what
guy.
happened to you? What happened? Did you watch Did you watch the Dusty Rhodes, whatever it was called again? I've already forgotten.
Hard Times.
The Hard Times. Is that what got you? Did you watch that
I
and
didn't
go,
see that
I'm
promo.
hooked?
I believe he did that promo somewhere in your area, in the Midwest or whatever you want to call it. And so no, I didn't see it because Dusty didn't really do WWE in that time. And what I caught of Dusty was during his run in Florida, and that was a remarkable run. Let me tell you about the story of the Midnight Rider, because this is great pro wrestling.
The Midnight Rider.
The Midnight Rider. So they took the Allman Brothers song.
You like the Allman Brothers.
And you can tell. Dusty knew the song. The long hair crate. No,
I don't know.
Look at the Hard Times promo. Tell me that man didn't listen to the Allman Brothers.
You're right. Come on. You're right. He definitely was listening to. He was driving a Trans Am down the road listening to Midnight Rider. No doubt about it.
So the bottom line is Dusty is fighting against Ric Flair and looking to get. I think Dusty's held the NWA belt 3 times at the end of his career, right? So one time he had to give it up because he had a broken leg afterwards, or he actually defended it with a broken leg and lost it like 3 days later. And that
really had a broken leg?
I don't know if that was part of the story or if he actually really had a broken leg, but I wouldn't be surprised if he said, "I can't wrestle, but we'll give it up in the ring." He was a tough old bird, so I don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised either.
So the thing about his NWA title reigns is there was one I think that lasted a few months, but he was never like a Ric Flair long time champion. To me, at this point, he was feuding with Flair, and I really wanted him to win the belt. Flair won because he had so much charisma. You watch Hard Times, and at least you got it. You said the guy got something. And so he had that. Every week watching him talk I remember just laughing my ass off at times, So along comes Kevin Sullivan. I don't know if you remember Kevin Sullivan. Have you heard the name Kevin Sullivan? Kevin Sullivan, again, a very controversial wrestler in his day because he came out and he was on TV as a Satanist, straight Satanist, controlling people, hot girlfriend that he controlled that would, hand him foreign objects and shit. Around this time, Dusty Rhodes did a match with Abdul the Butcher in Florida too.
Like Sammy Terry, like he would.
I don't know. Yeah, weird shit. Like he brought in a guy named Mark Lewin who was a musclehead, and they called him
Lugosi or whatever.
The Purple Haze they called him. And I remember the dude would be like he was making pretend he was being controlled and stuff, and he wouldn't talk in interviews. It was just Kevin Sullivan. But go look at Kevin Sullivan wrestling Satanist interview or something like that. And you're talking about another guy with Dusty Rhodes level charisma playing a bad guy, right? So now him and Dusty, when Dusty comes to Florida, Dusty fights Kevin Sullivan. Dusty fights at some point Kevin Sullivan in a cage match. Loser leave Florida for 60 days. Sullivan wins the fight.
Okay, now I got to ask a question. I got to interrupt. So you're talking about Florida, and you're saying, is this the Latino thing where you were sneaking through the covers to watch it?
I was watching Gordon Soley make the call.
So you were a little kid.
But yes, the show was in English, but it was shown on channel 47 or 41.
But it only happened in Florida, so this was a local.
It was Florida wrestling that was being shown.
Okay. Yeah. So it was a local area.
Yeah, this was back in the days of the regions in wrestling and stuff like that.
Before it was all united.
And it's Florida Championship Wrestling.
Got it.
So Dusty loses the fight and he's suspended. And Kevin Sullivan's running amok down there. Other guys that were fighting down there, you had Barry Windham, Blackjack Mulligan, you had Cowboy Ron Bass. So you had real big, Big John Studd made an appearance in this type of era and stuff like that. So
Jerry Lawler, was he there?
Lawler didn't get to Florida though.
Oh, I know about Jerry Lawler because of Andy Kaufman.
Yeah, and Jerry Lawler is royalty, but he's more Tennessee area. He didn't get down to Florida. So now Dusty loses the match, and now here's the wrestling gimmick, right? 60 days, he can't come to the state. Kevin Sullivan is extremely happy. The next week, Kevin Sullivan is faced with the Midnight Rider, Dusty Rhodes in a mask, basically. And now I think in his resume listed the names he used in wrestling as Dusty Rhodes. And he was shameless about it because it was a black mask with a black cowboy hat, and he would come in and just beat, and he would do interviews exactly the same way, exactly the same tone and stuff like that. And he would leave, and he would never. And so here's the amazing part of the gimmick, and one of the things to me that shows what Dusty kind of did for the business kind of thing, So the Midnight Rider's on a tear, and I forget who he has to do a match with, and he winds up that, I know what it is too. Kevin Sullivan's got a manager too. He's a guy named J.J. Dillon, who was a legend in terms of, and this was him operating at the peak of his powers. And now J.J. Dillon starts making a call for people to come after the Midnight Rider and take his mask off. $10,000 to whoever can do it. He brings in Bad Leroy Brown and guys like this.
There was a guy named Bad Leroy Brown?
Yeah, and Bad Leroy Brown was a scary, large black man.
Now, this is early 80s, right?
Yeah. Maybe even late 70s. But I don't have a time frame in some of the retros I've been reading to patch up my memory.
Okay.
But so anyway, so nobody's been able to take the mask off of him. $10,000. Down comes now. He beats everybody. Gets a title fight with Ric Flair, and now the Midnight Rider faces Ric Flair for the title and wins.
Ric Flair is woo.
Ric Flair,
woo!
The legendary Ric Flair. Yes, 16-time world champion. He's still around and still doing things in the pro wrestling world. Spent time in the hospital. Ric Flair was a wild man, but an all-time champion. Now Dusty is his greatest foil at the time. And he faces the Midnight Rider and loses. And in the ring,
Ric Flair,
yeah,
and Dusty Rhodes,
yeah. Well, no.
But Dusty Rhodes is in the mask.
Yes, and when he wins the belt, and when he wins the belt, they take the belt from him immediately because he won't reveal who he is.
Okay.
Ta-da! So he leaves. Now the Midnight Rider leaves after 60 days, and Dusty comes back. And he never admits to who it was. They just move on. It's perfect pro wrestling. And it also shows Dusty, at some point to me, is a guy who said, I deserve the belt, but I won't take it now for the business. Sold Ric Flair, sold those guys. But I think he deserved more time with the belt. And that's my story. But that whole run of 60 days where he fought Cowboy Ron Bass and he fought those guys, as the Midnight Rider, I remember he would walk around with a fucking bull rope and a cowbell that he would just hit people with. You know what I mean? And it was
with a mask on.
As a 10-year-old, that's
and a cowboy hat.
And he also hit his whole body because he does have a noticeable birthmark on his body, right? So it was he wore a full black bodysuit. Sometimes came out with the long black, like trench coat kind of thing, and the black hat and things like that. So yeah, the Midnight Rider. And then
when you saw that, and he wins, was it the win that hooked you, or was it the whole what happened that made you? Because I'm all of a sudden I'm really interested. I'm genuinely for the first time actually interested in the storylines.
You've got Ric Flair there, who's just a dick, and always was, and a great wrestler, but you didn't want him to win the belt. You wanted him to lose the belt, And there were guys,
he was the bad guy.
Yeah, and there were guys in that era. Everybody was geared toward beating Flair. Once Flair had gotten to that position, you had guys like the Von Erichs that many of them are passed away now. May they rest in peace. But like all the brothers were lining up to fight him. I think one of them actually beat Flair during one of Flair got the belt 16 times, so he had to lose it, right? He lost it to Dusty and stuff, but then the Midnight Rider loss is one that goes down history because they gave the belt back to Flair.
So the Midnight Rider comes in, he beats Ric Flair. Does he pin him, or is it a decision, or
he wins? Yeah, it's a pin. The belt is exchanged. So
he gets the belt. He's holding the belt.
Yeah.
And then they come up into the ring and they say, "You have to take off your mask."
Yep. And then my father used to buy Pro Wrestling Illustrated and The Wrestler, and there were a series of magazines. There was like 4 or 5 different ones.
Your dad bought that.
Yeah, he bought that, and I would keep them, and he'd throw them away, and I would keep them and stuff.
A PhD psychologist,
two PhDs,
bought two PhDs, noted author, at least bilingual, if not trilingual, right? Spaniard.
Yeah, he spoke a lot of languages, actually.
And he bought wrestling magazines.
He was educated by any and all standards around the globe. Everybody would be like, "Holy fuck, this dude's educated." Yes,
and he bought the magazines.
Yeah,
like he kept up on it that much.
Yeah, for sure. And we bought them all every month. But I remember I'd be like, "Dad, let's get them." I think it was a lot of the interaction with the kids too, with me and my brother. But yeah, the whole story is I wanted Dusty to beat Ric Flair for years, practically before that. And for him to win it as the Midnight Rider and not be able to keep it was just heartbreaking. Dusty had me at that moment,
So the fact you knew the Midnight Rider was Dusty Rhodes, right?
Oh yeah.
Did everybody know it?
I think this is where you got to give. This is where the pro wrestling show really. You are, as a promoter, you got to give him credit,
Oh,
and
100%.
I just recently saw John Cena do an interview, and this was this week.
He's an amazing human being.
And Cena said, nobody ever gave me a script, and I said, all right, terrific, this is great. You get handed shit, and you got to make it great. And Dusty did that. You know what I mean? So, and that's what I think, with that whole story there, he made it great because he just can't, every week the ass kickings that the Midnight Rider delivered.
Dude, okay, here's what we've got to do. Once a week for the next several weeks, you have to fill me in, and I want you to teach me about wrestling, about the WWE, and there's the new one, the AWE. They've got a transgender girl.
Yep, and gay athletes, and they're very modern, and also with a lot of ties to Dusty and Dusty's family and the showmanship of pro wrestling. Really fast.
And then there's the backyard wrestling stuff.
There's going to be a level where, like bare knuckle or like some of that,
Yeah.
There's only a certain level which really is primetime stuff. You know what I mean? If
course.
you really fall in love with wrestling and you want to go and watch it, yes, you can find it in many different aspects of it. And, some of the athletes are very, very dedicated and stuff like that, but they wouldn't be WWE level roster type athletes for physique and for many other different reasons. So, be careful and don't fall out of love with it because you see something you weren't expecting. If you're looking for top level stuff, stick with the pros now because you could definitely get into some wrestling.
Here's what I want to do. I first of all, I can't imagine me falling in love with wrestling or anything like that. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But I am intrigued, and I don't care about like the match itself and what they're doing. I don't care about that. That's the boring stuff. But what actually does sort of pique my interest when I took my son a couple of times. I've taken him twice, and as a promoter, I look at it and just was in awe. I was just stunned. It's a Wednesday night, and There's 30,000
Yeah.
people in this arena on a Wednesday
And they
night.
hit you with lights, camera action. I know.
And it is absolutely flawless. Flawless. There's not a glitch in the entirety of it. And you've got, I don't know, they must have done 15 wrestling matches. That's 30 people plus a couple of tag teams and the managers, and it's just a sensational thing to look at. But here's what I want you to do, and then we'll wrap this up because I got to go. But from this point forward, once a week for the next several weeks, I want you to teach me about pro wrestling. I want to know about, okay, so like one of the things I learned about pro wrestling from watching The Wrestler, the Mickey Rourke movie that was critically acclaimed, was bring the heat. You bring the heat, and that means that you're going to be beating that guy up for a while. And like, so there's terminology to it. There's tricks. I want to know all of it.
I'll admit there's many limitations there. And, Osborne would be much better at the insider stuff. But I've been around long enough, and I've been around pro wrestlers enough that I can tell you some of the stuff. I can tell you, like I said, as far as compelling stories, if you're buying in, I could for the next podcast ask me about. We'll repeat a story where they recycle the mask story. Of a wrestler going away because of some X reason.
I'm in.
And he comes back in a mask. Ask me about the dirty yellow dog.
The dirty yellow dog.
The dirty yellow dog.
Somebody out there in interweb land, remind me to ask Miguel about the dirty yellow dog in wrestling. And so do we have a deal? Can we do one wrestling podcast a week, professional wrestling podcast a week for the next several weeks, so you can teach me about professional wrestling?
We got to do one thing. This is great.
Please don't ask me to watch all of it.
No, but do me a favor. Watch the AEW promos and stuff that I sent.
Okay, I'll watch that. Yeah,
and let's do a podcast. AEW is hitting with a free show on the internet at Bleacher Report this weekend.
Okay, I'll watch that. I'll watch it.
And but here's the thing: is let's try to do a podcast on just that show, and I'll fill you in a little bit, and that way the people can be up to date before the show on that.
Okay, but I still need to know. I still need to understand basic terminology. I don't. How things work, if like they call it a work. I don't, I know what a work is from MMA. I mean, I watch Pride. Everybody can see a work in Pride, but there are things that I don't know the lingo, and so you're gonna literally have to teach me kind of from the ground up what this is. So I'm interested to know. I want to know the whole thing. I want to take it as if we're working on a thesis, and I really want to look at it. I'm actually really interested now.
Here's the thing.
I can't believe I'm saying that.
From a business perspective, the WWE has been really without competition. With all due respect to TNA and Nonstop, they were never really taken seriously. And guys wrestling for them wrestle their fucking asses off when I watched that show for a long time. But the point is WWE hasn't had competition for a long time. AEW is hoping or maybe could be that. So from a business perspective, it's also very interesting times to watch. And there'll be something that many of the things you watch in UFC and Bellator and things, we could be potentially in a period where we're going to watch a migration of people allowing their WWE contracts to expire so that they can explore an opportunity with another company. So on the business end, we're definitely entering times to watch in pro wrestling. With that, let's wrap it up, Chad. And it's been a great podcast.
I've absolutely loved this.
Yeah,
and I'm not ashamed to say it. I'm shocked, but I'm not ashamed. I'm fascinated.
I'm going to send you a couple other promos that I know that you're going to like. So we're going to have some fun.
Hey,
watch the Joey Janela promo though.
On the link, put on the links below, don't forget to subscribe, follow, share, all that stuff. On the links below, Miguel, make sure you put in that Dusty Rhodes thing because every political candidate, every candidate should watch that and just copy that. And
what's the name of that girl? Kind of young, long-haired Hispanic girl. I think she's from New York. That's like in the that won an election and now like
AOC.
AOC. That is.
Yeah.
If she comes out with hard times, I may I don't know.
She's not old enough to be president, but they might change the rules if she did that. It's that good.
I don't know anything about it, but she had her fucked up shoes from the campaign trail. That's hard times, bro. All right, bro. Let's hook up later, man. I'll see you soon.
Hey, thanks. I'm Chadillac. That's Miguel. Until next time, namaste. See you, brother.
Yes, sir.